Well, in my last so-called musings, I focused a bit on the question of orthodoxy within Shin Buddhism, or Jodo Shinshu. And if we want to talk about orthodoxy, uh, we really need to go to the source, which is the interpretation of the Pure Land tradition by Venerable Master Shinran Shonin, the 13th century monk who turned sort of not monk and not layman as he left Mount Hiei and followed Honen in his quest for an easier path to enlightenment that could be accessed by common people. And you've heard me mention, in fact, I've done some reciting of his masterwork called the Kyogao Shinsho. And the thing of it is, that's a pretty long, comprehensive work and includes a lot of quotes from other scriptures and so forth. And it is a masterwork. I think he completed it, at least the first draft of it, when he was about, I think, 53 years old. And then I believe continued to refine it over the course of his lifetime. And if I'm not mistaken, also that may have been composed in Chinese, so it may have been less accessible in terms of ordinary people in his time in Japan. But in any case, there is a shorter work that kind of follows or parallels some of the elements of content and doctrine that are in the Kyogao Shinsho, and that's called Passages on the Pure Land Way, which is Shinran's so-called Jodo Monrui Jusho. And this is the version that I'll be making reference to, which is part of the Shin Buddhism Translation series, and it's one that was published by the Hongwanji International Center actually quite a few years ago. I think I've mentioned before that there are a whole series of these small books that are really wonderful, and I suspect that probably the translations within most of these are the ones that are also replicated in the larger volume called, Shinran's writings, although I can't know that for sure or check it right at this moment. In any case, just to share the very first paragraph in the introduction here, that what the authors of this particular volume say is that for the reader venturing for the first time into the unfamiliar terrain of Shinran's many and varied writings, Passages on the Pure Land Way shines forth like a polished gem. In content and expression, it closely resembles Shinran's major work, Kyogao Shinsho, although only a fraction of its length, and for this reason has been overshadowed by it throughout the history of Shin Buddhist studies. Nevertheless, as a compendium of Shinran's teaching, Passages on the Pure Land Way is unsurpassed in the lucidity of its outline. So again, this is a wonderful work, and what I want to do is just focus on the first paragraph within Shinran's preface to the work, where he basically encourages us to follow this easy path that has been laid out for us by Amida Buddha in the context of the power of the vow he made when he was a cosmic bodhisattva called Dharmakara Bodhisattva and made the 48 vows in front of the Buddha Lokesvara Raja. So here he says, the radiant light, unhindered and inconceivable, eradicates suffering and brings realization of joy. So again, we hear over and over within Shinran's imagery the idea of light, which of course symbolizes wisdom, which is basically prajna in the context of the broader Mahayana. And again, I recently told somebody that part of why I greatly appreciate Shinran's particular interpretations is that they are grounded in the larger Mahayana tradition and in the larger Mahayana array of teachings. So again, he says, the radiant light, unhindered and inconceivable. These are such important terms. Unhindered in the sense that if we think of the power of the vow, of the 18th vow that Dharmakara made, which was fulfilled when he became Amida Buddha, that guarantees us that we can be reborn in his pure land when we die merely by having faith or entrusting in him and in the power of that vow and reciting the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, that nothing can hinder that power of that vow, which is represented by this light. Even the commission of evil that stems from our evil karma or our negative karma cannot hinder the effectiveness of this vow. Now, again, that doesn't mean that there should be contrived and evilness or that we should do bad things simply because we know the power of the vow will save us. But the point is, if our particular causes and conditions and karmic circumstances are such that we commit acts which are not pure and filled with goodness, which applies to virtually all of us, that those acts, those bad thoughts, bad speech, bad behavior, to use value judgments, those negative kinds of characteristics that we might find in ourselves if we're honest with ourselves, those things cannot hinder the efficacy of this vow to be able to give us that guarantee that we can be reborn in the Pure Land and no longer have to fret the notion that we could backslide into some kind of retrogression. And inconceivable, the radiant light, unhindered and inconceivable. To me, that's one of the most profound terms, because even though Shinran's interpretation of the Pure Land tradition and the Pure Land tradition itself embodies and is characterized by many concepts and images, particularly of the beauty and the wonders of the Pure Land, that at the end of the day, really, it's inconceivable. There are no concepts that can accurately portray the nature of either Amida Buddha or the Pure Land. So that's where faith comes into play, that we have to entrust the vow on the basis of the promise that Amida made, and not necessarily think that with our dualistically oriented brain that we can actually pin it down into some kind of definitive kind of characterization that can be objectively verified, if you will. The radiant light, unhindered and inconceivable, eradicates suffering and brings realization of joy. So again, it can't help us get rid of, like, for example, physical pain, but it's talking about the emotional and spiritual suffering that we inevitably encounter as a result of the fact that most fundamentally we know we're going to die. And again, that realization, that sense of reassurance that we are embraced, never to be abandoned by Amida in the context of his vow, that this eliminates that spiritual anxiety and suffering and brings into our heart great joy. The excellent name, which of course is Namo Amida Butsu, called the Nembutsu, which is basically thought of as Amida's name, perfectly embodies all practices, eliminates obstacles, and dispels doubt. So it's through the power of the name, which Amida has vested in the name his myriad virtues, that is the ticket, if you want to think in crude terms, to help us go forth from this life and be reborn in the Pure Land, and at that point become a Buddha, and then engage in the phase of returning in order to be able to help beings who we were not able to help in the context of our ordinary lives in this Saha world. I'll just do that first sentence again, which had a semicolon in the middle. The radiant light, unhindered and inconceivable, eradicates suffering and brings realization of joy. The excellent name, perfectly embodying all practices, eliminates obstacles and dispels doubt. Shinran goes on to say, this is the teaching and practice for our latter age. In other words, the age now which is so far removed from the historical Buddha and the ability to directly hear from him. This is the teaching and practice for our latter age. Devote yourself solely to it. So he's not only just encouraging us, he's really telling us this is what will work. This is what's available. This is what we're capable of following, as opposed to the self-power practices of the broader Mahayana. If somebody's able to perform those, go for it. But the point is, for many of us, we realize our inadequacies, our limitations, and we recognize that this is a path that was made for us. So then he says, accepting and living the supreme universal vow, then abandon the defiled and aspire for the pure. reverently embracing the Tathagata's teaching, respond in gratitude to his benevolence and be thankful for his compassion. So once we entrust in the vow and have the assurance that we'll be reborn in the Pure Land, what's left for us in terms of practice is basically just simply to recite the Nembutsu, not as a form of self-power to get us to enlightenment, but basically to express gratitude for what we've been given by Amida in the context of the power of his vow. So in the second paragraph, in his preface, and I'll read the whole thing, but then I want to drill down on a particular aspect in terms of the sort of 7 Dharma masters or patriarchs within Shin Buddhism. And by the way, here he's referring to himself as Gutoku, which I think is sort of bald-headed one. In other words, it's a name, a nickname, if you will, that he gave himself to reflect his own humility. He said, "Here I, Gutoku of outlying islands, relying on the treatises from India and the western regions, and looking to the explanations of the teachers of China and Japan, reverently entrust myself to the teaching, practice, and realization that are the true essence of the Pure Land Way. And knowing keenly that the Buddha's benevolence is difficult to fathom, I seek to clarify it through this collection of passages on the Pure Land Way." So again here, he's making reference to the treatises from India, and that's basically talking about Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, and also then the explanation of the teachers of China, which would be Tanluan, Tao Cho, and Shantao, and the explanation of teachers of Japan, which would be Genku and Genshin. And he reverently entrusts himself based on what he has learned. He gives credit to these masters as being really the source of his own inspiration and insights, as well as his own interpretation, although he has deviated, all due respect to the 7 masters, in the sense that, to my mind, he has evolved. It's been an evolution over the course of hundreds of years up until the point of Shinran, of further and further refinement of this easy path, if you will, to the point where Shinran refined it to its ultimate degree, to a system of pure grace. So then he knows the Buddha's benevolence, which is difficult to fathom, and that's the reason he composed this, which would cover the teaching, practice, and realization. Those are the 3 elements, that he talks about in his passages on the Pure Land Way, and that he also covers in the Kaiogao Shinsho. But I just want to give a little more information about these 7 in terms of who they are, and I want to do it in the context of a scroll, which I can show you a picture of the scroll, and I actually have this scroll because Reverend Takata, who is the minister at the Los Angeles Buddhist Temple, where I am formally a member, even though I live probably 2,500 miles away from it, he arranged for me to get a copy of this scroll, which is a very, very prominent one, very famous one, that within Shin Buddhism, that shows pictures, has pictures painted on it of the patriarchs. And so in the upper part on the right hand side, and I'm not sure if it's the right hand side or the left hand side as you're seeing it in the photo up on the screen, but the first patriarch from India was Nagarjuna, or Ryuju in Japanese, and he lived around, and all of these dates are in the Common Era, he lived around 150 to 250. And then there was Vasubandhu, who was opposite to him, or in Japanese his name is Tenjin, and again he was from India, around 300 to 400 CE. And then in the middle there you have Tanluan. Tanluan was a major influence on Shinran, and I've recited some of his works. If you go to the playlists on my channel, his name in Japanese was Danran, and he lived in China from 476 to 542. And then down below, in the second from the bottom row, are Shantao or Zendo, who was from China in 613 to 681. and Tao Chou, or Doshaku, who was from China in 562 to 645. And then finally down below are Genshin, who was Japanese and lived from 942 to 1017. And finally Genku, who was from Japan and lived from 1133 to 1212 Common Era. So you might want to look it up. Maybe if you go to Google Images and look up the Shin Buddhist 7 patriarchs or something along that line, you might be able to see this kind of scroll, and it really helps us in a way perhaps analogous to the Zen Buddhists when they put a lot of emphasis on identifying their lineage, all the way from Shakyamuni Buddha to Bodhidharma, who came from India to China to share the teaching, mainly in the context of meditation and the Lankavatara Sutra, and then through to Huineng, the sixth patriarch, and on forward to Dogen Zenshi, and all the various masters up until that actual current day person. So I have a friend who's a Zen Buddhist, and she's putting together a huge chart of all the members of her lineage. Well, these 7, I mean, it's a much more broad stroke kind of lineage, but it does have great meaning from the doctrinal standpoint in terms of Shinran identifying how each one of them made us more aware of the importance of this Pure Land tradition and a focus on Amida Buddha. And I believe I have a playlist called 7 Patriarchs that you can go to, where I've recited some of the material that's related to each of their contributions. But to close, I'll just recite not both of these paragraphs, but the first one again in Shinran's preface to his Passages on the Pure Land Way, where he says, "The radiant light, unhindered and inconceivable, eradicates suffering and brings realization of joy. The excellent name, perfectly embodying all practices, eliminates obstructions and dispels doubt. This is the teaching and practice for our latter age. Devote yourself solely to it. It is the eye and limb in this defiled world. Do not fail to endeavor in it. Accepting and living the supreme universal vow, then abandon the defiled and aspire for the pure. Reverently embracing the Tathagata's teaching, respond in gratitude to his benevolence and be thankful for his compassion. As am I thankful. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu."